Hey, welcome back to Cedar Studios. Today I want to show you really quick how I would take a desktop design like I'm working on here and translate it to a mobile design. So I'm working on a local bowling alley who's not quite ready to launch yet, so I just redacted the name. And most of the time I don't even do a mobile design, I just do the desktop, and then as I'm coding I just put together the mobile design because I'm able to do it pretty quickly in my head. But in this case, the client wants one. So I'm just going to take kind of the start of my design here, the first couple sections. I'm going to copy them over here. And I'm going to get started reducing the width down and making this look good for mobile. So we'll call this mobile. Okay, first things first is this whole thing is set to a fixed width of 1920 pixels. I'm going to reduce that down to 390. That's what an iPhone is these days. And I got a lot of sections to fix because they just broke. They're too wide. So the first is this nav bar. I'm going to go ahead. It's a little hard to see, but here are the nav links. I don't use those on mobile. I do like a hamburger menu. So the first thing I'm going to do is take these nav links and just delete them. So this got a lot smaller. I'm going to reduce this to 390 as well. And then there's a frame in here that's really wide. I'm just going to set that to hug contents so it shrinks. Okay. Or actually, not hug contents. I want fill container. There we go. So it goes the whole way around. So I'm going to put a hamburger menu icon in right here. So where I'm going to get that from is a website called Iconify. And I've talked about this in the blog before, but this is a place where you can get all these different kinds of icons and icon packs just as CSV files. So if I search for hamburger menu, I got a lot of different options. I'm gonna go with something, kind of thick like this. So I can either download the SVG file, or for Figma, I can just copy and paste it, which is super nice. Don't have to download a bunch of stuff. So I paste it, it showed up here. I'm going to bump it up, maybe like, 24 pixels tall. That should be about right. Maybe make it 2, yeah, a width of 2, and then make this white because it's going to go on here. So we drag that in. Now I could make this smaller because it's kind of taking up a lot of space, but I think I'll just delete it. Delete all the text and just let the logo stand for itself. And so now I just want to add a little left and right padding. I can do that over here in the auto layout. There's vertical padding, there's horizontal. Let's try 16. I usually use that for what's called the gutters over here on a mobile layout. So that looks pretty good now. You just click this, you see all your links. Okay, next, this font is going to be way too big. It's at 96. Let's just drop it down to like 48. I think that's going to look better. And I'll go ahead and break these words up a little different. So now this is as big as it can be just about because it's filling up the screen. And I think that'll work. So next thing we're going to do is I'm just going to swap the layout of this from horizontal over here to vertical. You're going to notice this is a pattern. I'm taking everything that's, horizontally laid out on the desktop version and making it vertical. That's one theme. Another theme is going to be like we did here, getting the font down to something that's a little bit more appropriate for a phone. So here, now these button labels are really large, especially compared to what's supposed to be the focal point of this hero section. So let's drop these down to like 18 pixels. And this button now is a little less wide, so I'm just going to make that fill the rest of this container so they're the same size by changing the width to fill container. Now we want to address some spacing issues. Everything here looks like technically right, it's just the spacing is all off. So let's go into this auto layout between these, move that from 64 down to 16. Okay, that looks a lot better. And that's going to be, I know from experience when I develop this, comfortable tap targets on mobile. Now between these two is 96. I'm going to bump this down 64. And let's try like 80. I think that'll look good. And then the final spacing issue I notice is this padding on top and bottom is too large. You're going to have to scroll just to see this thing. So let's bump that down here to like 200. That looks a little better. I feel like because of the menu bar, there's too little space up here compared to down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click individual padding here, and I'm just going to reduce this one to, let's call it like 150 pixels. Okay, that looks a little more balanced for a phone screen. So I think this looks pretty good. I could maybe make these a little smaller, but just so it's not as noticeable as like this, which I want to be the focal point. But I think this looks pretty good for now. Okay, here, okay, we kind of broke everything with it being so wide. So let's just go ahead. I'm going to delete that for now. And I'm just going to do this, element by element. So I'm going to start with the specials and parties. I'm going to drag this off kind of into blank space here and rearrange it. So again, two things we've been doing this whole time is number one, making things vertical, not horizontal, and number two, changing the font size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click into here and make this array of little, what's going to eventually be links. I'm going to make that instead of horizontal, it's going to be vertical. Now, let's drag this in. We're going to have to do it like this, I think. Yeah, there we go. We'll drag this in and then we'll address some of the spacing issues and the font size issues. So very first thing I want to do is I want to add some padding on either side. I know that this text was set pretty wide, 260. That's going to be a little big. Let's call it like 200. And now on this frame, we'll just make sure we have a gutter of like 16 pixels. Okay. Now you'll notice over here, for this section, I have 100 pixel padding on top and bottom, which I usually do for the sections for a desktop design. Here, I'm going to do about 60. That usually looks pretty good on mobile. Now, let's drop down the font sizes because those are pretty big. This was at 32. Let's make it more like 28 for this big section, or for this top section. For these titles, let's make them, they're at 24. Let's make them more like 20. And then here, these are all at 18. Let's just drop them down to 16. What we're going for is vertical, or rather visual hierarchy. So you want the top text, this main header, to be the biggest thing. Then the next most important thing, which has the next biggest font size, are these individual titles. And then the least important thing with a small font size are going to be these descriptions here. So this is looking pretty good. The only thing is, I think the spacing between these items is kind of big. So let's go ahead and get into this auto frame. It's at 64. Let's just drop it down to 32. Yeah, I think that's going to look better. And then between these two things, there's 32 as well. That seems to be pretty balanced. Next, we'll throw in these hours. I'll do the same thing. I'll grab this auto layout, make a copy kind of off in space, and then we'll start with the vertical arrangement. So I'll take these, make it vertical, and that's looking pretty good. We'll drop it in here. And then let's copy the sort of fonts from up here we had for this main thing, 28, which is what that is. And then for these font sizes, we will make them all 16 instead of 18. And then these are all like way too spaced out too. So instead of 64, in between, I'll do like 16. Yeah, that looks better. So all my fonts and stuff are looking pretty good. I think there just needs to be a little more space between here. So it looks like right now I need to put this and this in their own category. Okay, now I can adjust the space here. Let's double it, see how that looks. A lot of times I'll double from 32 to 64, or if I want something a little more subtle, I'll go from 32 to 48, so 1.5 times the size. But this actually looks pretty good. Okay, so now I've got like a pretty good mobile layout coming around. Looks like I might want to do a little something with the empty space here, the empty space at the bottom. I have these little opaque bowling pins in there, so I could, experiment with putting something in here. I would have to drop down the size, of course. But something like that. Make sure this goes to, the bottom here behind the images and stuff. And then the blue one, maybe I'll put in here. I like to usually play with the placement of these things a little more. I won't do that today, just so I don't take up all of our time. Make sure that thing's kind of at the bottom of this frame so the text goes over it too. Yeah, so that's looking pretty good. So maybe once the device goes from a phone to something larger like a tablet or a desktop like this, I'll make these little images bigger and kind of replace where I put them. But that's essentially what we want to do to translate a desktop page to a mobile page. Shrink things down to the width you want, then address the verticality. You want things to be vertically laid out, not horizontally like you do for a desktop design. Then mess with the text. The text is roughly half the size, at least for this, but maybe like 2/3 the size for these. And then spacing, just respace things out. These are pretty far apart width-wise, and then here they're not super far apart vertically. And that's it. If you have any questions about this or you want to see more of this sort of thing, let me know in the comments.